to this Monstrous Flesh podcast mini-series, Monstrous Flesh Summer Camp. Bring your marshmallows and your sleeping bag as we huddle around the campfire to discuss some of the sweatiest and most bloodthirsty summer horrors. I'm Meg, one of your camp counsellors.
Hello, I'm Clelia, one of the other camp counsellor.
And in this mini-series, we are diving into our summer of screams. And in this episode, we find ourselves trapped in the woods with Cropsy as we talk about The Burning.
Da, da, da.
So, would you like to give us a synopsis, Clelia, before we get into it?
I mean, I don't particularly want to, but I'll do it. Come on, let's get into it. All right, at summer camp, some teenagers put a prank on the camp's caretaker, Cropsy. But the joke goes terribly wrong, and the teens leave Cropsy for dead after setting him on fire. But no one keeps Cropsy down. A few years later, the burned and disfigured caretaker returned to camp equipped with his trusty shears, ready to unleash his particular brand of vengeance on a whole new group of teens. The murderous Cropsy stalks the campers in the woods one by one.
You see, you make it sound like a much better film than it is from that synopsis.
Right? Exactly. I was thinking, is that, this actually listening to the synopsis, it makes me feel like this is a film I want to watch. But we watched the film. Had you seen the film before? I'd never even come across it before, personally.
No, I'd never seen it before. So, yeah.
And we watched it on the same night. I remember we watched it on the same night and we were texting all the way through. And then we were like, no, we gotta keep some for the podcast. Yeah. We gotta keep some for the podcast. So.
Keep some thoughts for the podcast. Just texting, what the fuck? What the fuck? What am I watching?
Exactly. What the fuck is this film? But the thing is that this film is actually really well regarded, right? As a cult film. I mean, I've come across so many, during the prep of this film, I've come across so many... I don't know, so many positive reviews of it. And I was like, what, did I watch the same thing? Like, this is just so different from my own experience of the film.
Yeah.
I mean, I know people are hungry or thirsty for a slasher, but I don't know, it's not even in the top 5 for me. It really isn't.
No. I mean, I think, like, Sleepaway Camp just blows it out of water. It's just,
Exactly.
Well, we'll get into it, but, I think probably the production team might have had something to do with that.
Yeah, I would assume so. I think that's one of the first texts that we exchanged, being like, oh, it's a Harvey Weinstein production.
PU.
Actually, and I find out is, yeah, exactly. But you know what, we've acknowledged it and we don't need to, to deep dive it. But let's just say that, it goes some way in explaining why the scariest part of the film is not the killer. Poor Cropsy, not poor Cropsy, sorry. He's a fucking creep, but, definitely not the creepiest guy in the film, let's put it that way.
Yeah. God almighty, honestly. I mean, have you got some interesting production details for us? Some horrors.
Yeah, I've got some. So let's give some context for people maybe like us don't know the film, haven't seen it, or are not very familiar with it, heard of it but not very familiar. So it's a 1981 American slasher film directed by Tony Maylam, who is best known for his award-winning documentary film White Rock by the 1976 Winter Olympics. And the reason why I mention this is because the film had a best-selling soundtrack by Rick Wakeman, former member of the band Yes, and Rick Wakeman also composed the soundtrack for The Burning, which, in my opinion, is one of the few redeeming features of this film. The story, I assume that you're going to talk about this a little bit later, but the story is based on the New York urban legend of the Cropsy Maniac, and the screenplay was written by Peter Lawrence and Bob Weinstein from a story conceived by Harvey Weinstein. I mean, this is where, for me, it gets a little bit, how can you conceive a story when the story already existed? But anyway,
because he's a fucking hack. That's why. Because he's just a fucking
precisely.
hack.
You took the words out of my mouth. But anyway, it is the first Miramax production. It is also, I mean, the film is quite interesting in the sense that it's got I mean, the cast is really interesting, right? You've got Jason Alexander or Josh Costanza, if people are familiar with Seinfeld. Fisher Stevens makes his debut there. And Holly Hunter as well, which I didn't realize when I watched the film. I did not spot her. But yeah, she has a little a cameo in their whole first small role anyway about it. So I know that the film wasn't a hit in the US at its when it was first released, but funny enough, it was the highest grossing horror movie in Japan that year. Oh. God knows why. In the US, the MPAA gave in to the reception of pressure groups who were protesting slasher films at the time in the wake of John Lennon's assassination and the growing turmoil of violence in the media. Thus, the film was heavily cut down to receive an R rating. And in the UK, you will have guessed it already, but the film was part of the Video Nasties list as the distributor accidentally released the uncut copy. I love that. That's kind of out of respect. At least, they were like, oh, in for a penny, in for a pound. Yeah. And the other interesting fact about it is that Tom Savini did the special effects for this film, like he did for Friday the 13th. And again, I think this is one of the few redeeming features of the film. Yeah. One thing that made me laugh about finding out that is that Tom Savini turned down Friday the 13th Part 2 in order to make that film. And there was an interview of him talking about it, saying that the reason why he turned down Friday the 13th anyway, Friday the 13th Part 2, is because like that, if you watch any other film after Friday the 13th Part 1, you're an idiot, because Jason is not part, Jason has no part to play in this story, which I was thinking, but it was his idea to bring it back at the end of the first film. So very much rewriting history there. Yeah.
He's lived to regret it. That's what's happened. He's gone, you know what? I said that as a joke and he took me seriously, and now look what's happened. We've got 9 sequels. Can't stop making this shit. Like, this is all my fault.
Exactly. Oh, okay. Should we deep dive in the film? Should we actually talk about the narrative?
Oh my God, let's go. Jeez. Well, to be fair, I was surprised by how many people, like you said, like Jason Alexander, and people kept popping up, and I was like, oh my God. Like, but I suppose a lot of people, they get the start in horrors, don't they? Like they do a horror film and then, but I think it's, unfortunately, the cast does little to help.
Exactly. Well, they do very little to help the horror agenda of the film, I would say. But you were saying when we were talking about Friday the 13th, you were saying that it's it's got not enough murders. But this film, in some way, you can cut it. You could cut a version of the film where there are no murders, almost, and that would probably be a better story, by the way. Could be like about teen romance. Rapey romance.
Yeah. Oh my God. Honestly,
it could be a very problematic film, but like for loads of different reasons.
Yeah.
I feel.
I think that is the thing, isn't it? I mean, I did think at the start, like, my note was about camp hijinks. Why are they always this way? Like, why are they always doing stuff like this? And I did think that, like, what is the purpose of this prank? I mean, all right, this guy, this Cropsy, is like, the alcoholic caretaker, is a bit of a dickhead.
Is that a thing?
Yeah, apparently, it's like, oh, well, yeah, we all know one of them, don't we? But, like, all right, he's a bit of a dickhead, but I think setting him on fire were a little bit much.
Right? But, okay, one of the first note, I watching that first scene, my first note was, where did they find a severed human head?
Where did they find it?
And should we not be more concerned about this rather than them pulling a prank?
Yeah. That was my note. My note was, where did they get a skull from? Where did they get a skull from? Just digging a skull
And it looks like it's in,
worms.
Yeah, and it's in a state of decomposition, so it's not that old. It's not like, it's not... So my theory is there is more to it.
Yeah, like, to me, I was like, well, to be fair, this whole thing could have been avoided. Cropsy did overreact a little bit. I mean, it were only a skull. screaming and kicking it over. You know, I do think he overreacted slightly. I'm not saying it's pleasant.
Yeah.
But I think...
He pulled it towards him, though.
You know,
like, I feel like if you woke up and something scared you, you would shy away from it. You wouldn't pull it towards you. But that's very much what he does. And I was like, Cropsy, I'm sorry. And also, obviously didn't, you know, made things worse when he stumbles on the open container of gasoline that he kept next to his bed, by the way. I mean, lucky that he didn't also keep an oxygen tank and liquid napalm, you know?
It didn't just happen to have like a spare atomic bomb just hanging about under his pillow, just in case. You know, it's like
exactly.
This could not have gone worse. Like, obviously, he's soaked in booze because he's an alcoholic. We've found that out. So, you know, he's soaked in booze. There's an open container of gasoline laying about. I mean, you know, health and safety be damned, really.
Sounds like he would have, exactly. It sounds like an accident was waiting to happen anyway. So the kids only, you know, facilitated it. I kind of feel like,
you know. And also putting candles in his eyes was such a weird thing to do. It was so weird.
Such a weird thing to do.
Just 2 birthday cake candles in like eye sockets. So strange. But yeah, I mean, and then they just ran away and left him, which were quite shitty. Just left him to die.
They did absolutely nothing. They just just left him to die. I love the fact that you can clearly see it's a dude in a fire suit, by the way, when he's running out of the cabin. You can see the guy's wearing a helmet and gloves. It's like, so why Cropsy might not be very vigilant keeping gasoline in his cabin when he's out and about on fire is, you know, he knows how to take precautions. So you got to admire this.
Honestly, yeah. And I mean, I did think as well, like, there were an underlying current of just absolute lack of sympathy, though, when you saw him in hospital and that guy were like, I wrote it down, what he said. He said, he's a fucking Big Mac overdone. He's a freak and a monster. And I thought, what a bedside manner this is. You're in the right job.
I know. Who the fuck is this doctor? Exactly. It was like, I don't want to, no way do I want to be like this freak. And I was just like, well, I hope you don't talk to your patients like this. But also, I thought, what kind of doctor gets freaked out by a burn victim? You just think, again, like you said, it's like you're in the wrong job.
Yeah. So you've got this guy who's awful, who's got like no sympathy and bedside manner. And then this other guy who's like, I'm a doctor. I don't want to see burns. Like, what do you mean you don't want to see burns? You're a doctor. He's like, oh, no, that's too much. That's too much. Not burns. Oh God, but burns. But I did like that the voiceover as we sort of saw Cropsy's recovery were basically saying that I know you were burnt to a crisp, and I know that it were a cruel prank and everybody's awful and calling you a monster, but don't hold a grudge. Just move on.
Don't hold a grudge. Just move on with your life. To be fair, they're like, move on with your life. We've kept you in the hospital for 5 years.
5 years.
5 years. I mean, very good health insurance, I have to say.
I was going to say, you know? I mean, how were he still in there for 5 years? How much did that cost? 5 years. My God.
And they couldn't do anything. They were like, we need the bed back now. It's been 5 years. Move on.
I love how they get so much exposition. They were like, we're sorry, the skin grafts didn't take. Oh, don't hold a grudge. Like, this like shadowy, you know, echoey voice.
I know. It's just like, you know, seeping. Let the trauma seep in, basically. Like, imagine being that person. But then, so what does Cropsy do immediately after being released from hospital?
Well, obviously, he does what any sane person would do. He's going to bang.
Exactly.
That's what he's going to do. We don't know. All we know is his burns are extensive enough that he's had to stay in the hospital for 5 years, and skin grafts have not worked. But obviously, his first port of call when he leaves hospital is boning. That's all he wants to do.
Absolutely. Well, exactly. It's like a man released from jail.
Yeah. It's like, what am I going to do?
Just like,
I'm going to bone. And I did.
Yeah, gonna bone.
I mean, it was very Weinstein that. To be like, what can we do? Right, what's he going to want? What would I want? 5 years in hospital, I'd want to have sex. That's what I'd want to do. So how can we do it? Let's get a really stereotypically, like, aggressively unpleasant portrayal of a sex worker. Let's do that. Let's make sure we really just really, like, you know, grind home that she's a sex worker.
Yeah.
Let's make it
so people have no doubt that she is a sex worker.
Let's make sure. Let's be explicit. Really explicit. And then she's obviously going to go, oh, no, what a monster. Oh, stay away. And then obviously a logical response to that is to just stab her to death. That, you know, I mean, I I don't even know what to say. I was watching that opening thing and I thought, none of this makes any sense to me because, you know, I'm sure as a sex worker, she's seen a lot of shit. You know, she's like...
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, she saw his face out in the street, so it's not, you know, I think she was very homely. She was very, you know, pleasant to him.
A very nice woman.
And
lovely woman.
Exactly. Just doing her job, just going about her day
doing
or
her job,
evening. And,
going about her business, trying to just earn a living like we all are. And then suddenly he's like, rather than going, you know what, actually... I have been horrifically burned beyond all recognition. So it might be a shock.
I better murder you.
It might be a shock. So rather than giving her a moment to process this, what I'm going to do is stab her. That's what I'm going to do. Yeah. All this rage, I'm going to take it out on this poor woman who had nothing to do with anything, who I've just come upon in the street. Honestly, I just thought to me, that opening is like everything that's wrong with slashers in 80s. That encapsulates, I think, what is wrong with them because it's just...
Yeah. I mean, to be fair, so this scene, and I'm certain of it, is directly inspired from Peeping Tom from 1960.
Yeah.
But you know, in Peeping Tom, it served a very different purpose, and actually, the building up to it was, you know, it's so good, like, and it's so. You know, it's so well made, but I just thought they were so cheap and nasty and just everything about it really pissed me off. You just think, you know, the guy, as you said, goes out of hospital and decides to go and murder a sex worker before going to murder children.
Yeah.
A camp.
It added nothing. It made no sense based on what we'd just seen it set up. It makes no sense in context at rest of film. It just literally were just an excuse to rip a woman's shirt up and then stab her with a pair of scissors.
Exactly.
They were like, we ain't going off for that.
And this is when people, you know, when I was talking last weekend to someone about about such thing. Why do we talk about, you know, horror films with a feminist lens? And they just couldn't really grasp the concept of it. And we're talking about, you know, the unnecessary nudity and, you know, women being murdered on, you know, being seen naked and then murdered on screen, basically. And, you know, their response was like, well, you know, this is what sells. And it's like, yeah, but isn't that what we should like? Why shouldn't we question this? Like, why does it sell?
Yeah. That's what people like. Well, is that not the problem then? Is that not what we should be sort of challenging? Like, that's what people like, is it? That's what people want to watch. You know, you've nearly got the point. It's like, you were so close to the point there. You were really, really so close.
Yeah, and you completely missed it. The only other thing I thought is that they added that scene to pad out the murder count, because without it, the film, I think the film would hardly qualify as a slasher without it. I mean, it takes so long to get to get a kill in this film.
Yeah, it's like, I mean, I did think as well, like, my note that I had. So we go from this poor woman who has done nothing wrong, being murdered with scissors. Quite good effects, you know, like it's Tom Savini, brilliant effects, whatever. Straight into some sort of weird baseball game where everybody's fully dressed apart from women who are playing baseball in the knickers. Just in the knickers.
Yep.
And I was like, braless, slow-mo, braless women, running, somebody in a pants. And my note was that also, so my note was, first thing he wants to do is bang Very Weinstein about that first scene. And then braless young women running in slow-mo. Apparently, he also did costume design. That was my note for this film.
Well, interestingly enough, so the film did not have a costume department, so most of the actors wore their own clothes. I'm sure being guided by the idea of the producer behind it. But that's my note as well. I say no costume department, and also the female characters were clearly told to remove their bra as well. Like, it's just. Come on, it's so flagrant. And so that long baseball game interspersed with pervy, like, really, it's just made me really uncomfortable watching. Yeah. I mean, the whole film, the whole vibe is just so uncomfortable.
Yeah. No, our thoughts, I was watching it just thinking, just ick. Just like, ugh, what is this shit? Like, no one does that. no one in the history of the world, no woman has ever gone, oh, we're playing baseball, let me just take my trow off. No one has ever said that, ever. Like, even if, you know, all right, oh, it's summer, oh, we're by the lake. Well, you'd still have some sort of shorts on. Oh, men were wearing shorts. Men weren't playing in their underpants. They were all fully clothed. So, yeah, I just thought that was cheap. I just think overall, I think you hit nail on head when you said it was just cheap. I think it's just a cheap film. It's not, there's no real story.
No, and we said, we've talked in Friday the 13th or, Sleepaway Camp, or no, less Sleepaway Camp, I suppose, but in Friday the 13th, certainly how you don't really care about any of the characters. But I think in that one, not only do you not care about the characters, you actively pray for them to be murdered. I mean, especially the men. I mean, and that's what really pissed me off as well, because they set them off, they set them up as those horrible characters, and yet it's always, the women are always the first victims. And, yes, some of the guys get murdered, but it seems like an afterthought. It's not, they're not getting their up comments because they are bad people.
Yeah.
Right? It's like, it's just so frustrating.
Yeah, well, and I think that what thing for me as well is I think I've got a note on that as well, is like, why is he killing women? Because women didn't hurt him. It were a group of men, of boys and young men who hurt him. So if this is about revenge, why is he killing all these women?
Exactly.
Because they didn't do out to him. And I did think that, like, and just... I don't know. It were like, I mean, camp just looks like hell to me anyway. And I know I've said this before. I've never liked my peers. I've never wanted to be around them for a prolonged period of time. So every time I see a film set in a camp, I just think, ugh, why are you there? This looks awful. Now we're watching that.
What are you doing?
Yeah, what are you doing? Do you really want to be like, sleeping in bunk beds, covered in mosquito bites, surrounded by creepy blokes? Like, it just looks miserable to me. I mean, some excellent jumpers, that's what I would say. And if it were all their own clothes, there were some very snappy dresses. Jason Alexander had some brilliant jumpers in this. I did take note of that.
Right? Yeah.
Yeah. But also, like you're saying about the men, so this Glazer guy is a dick.
Fucking Glazer.
But the worst person in this film is that fucking Alfred, that little fucking creep.
Yeah, Alfred the creep. That was my note. Alfred, resident creeper Alfred was my note on this. Yeah, I mean, you're supposed to feel sympathy for him because Glazer bullies him throughout the film, but actually he's such a little creep.
He bullies him. The thing is, I was watching that, and that's what I said. He bullied him because he committed a sex crime against his girlfriend.
Yes,
he attacked her in a shower. He were lucky that he only verbally abused him. Like, he could have ripped his head off his neck, and who would have said that he were wrong? He committed the thing that got me with it, and I think that's when you know where this film is going. Is that little fucking creep committed a sex crime, and guy who's running place just basically goes, "Boys will be boys." All kids do that.
So what am I gonna do? Cut his balls off? It's like, fucking hope so. Like, at the very least.
Yeah. I just, but then you've also got like that other guy who's, again, terrible with names. When she's like, oh, I don't know if I want to go out with him. I'm a bit scared of him. And I'm like, why do you make her go out with this guy then? She said she's scared of him, quite rightly, because he's a douche. I mean, we see that like throughout the film. But the dynamic between the like men and women in this film is so toxic and gross. Every relationship, everyone is awful. So like when Uru's like the leader of the girls' camp is kicking off about Alfred committing a crime, and that guy's like, oh, just kids, boys will be boys. And then they're obviously together. So she's just like, you.
You're right.
I think, what? For police? He's a creep and he never gets better. He creeps all the way through this film. Only reason he sees murders is because he's trying to watch people shag. He's just a voyeur. He's gross. He's just all I see Woods peeping on everybody. Little fucking weirdo. Oh, made me sick. Whoa.
Oh, that was great. I love it.
And another thing that's really irritating in this film, the continuity in this film is appalling. It is absolutely appalling. They're in a shower, her hair's dry, her hair's wet, there's shampoo in it. But it don't matter because we're looking at her tits. So no one cares.
Because the tits, exactly. That's exactly what I said when I was watching it as well.
Well, hold on. Her hair, there weren't shampoo in her hair a minute ago. Oh no, continuity's bad. And then she turns to look round and it's other. So they've obviously just cut two different scenes together, obviously thinking, no one's going to notice because they're just looking at her tits, aren't they?
Oh, exactly. And they purposely reframe the shot as well.
From underneath. Honestly, absolutely shocking. And, you know, and I think, yeah, I just feel like the vibe is so weird. Like, all boys are creeping. All girls are basically saying, oh, just go out with him even though you're scared of him because, oh, you know, he's fine. And then all lads are like talking about just wanking and looking at porn together, which I find a bizarre thing to be doing. Just looking at, I don't know, I just feel like if this is the people who wrote this film, I mean, it makes sense because all the men in this film are just creepy, begging fuckboys, just coercive, creepy, begging little, yeah, go on, oh, just touch it. And you think, well, yeah, look who wrote it.
Exactly,
look who involved in it.
It's like history writing itself, basically, yeah.
Oh, yeah. But, I mean, I know, we've talked about this, like, last time when we talked about Sleepaway Camp. You look back at things and you see different things that you might not have seen at time, but I do think that is a frightening time capsule.
Yeah. It is. And it seems difficult to imagine how it was perceived any other way, even then, because I feel like there are a lot of, I mean, it really does surprise me when people still talk about this film and how much they love it and how much, they think that it's that it's a really good film, because like, let's leave that on the side for 1 minute. It's just the plot is so full of holes. And last time we were talking about talking about Friday the 13th, and we made that joke about Ralph being in the pantry for so long. There is let's talk about the main killing scene in The Burning, when the campers have discovered that the rafts are missing, the canoes are missing. So they decide to build a raft, and a team of them go back to the main camp to see if they can find it, to see if they can find them, and they come across a single canoe floating about in the middle of the river. Don't know how long it's been there, but as they approach the canoe, Cropsey just jumps out and murders everyone, which begs the question. How long was Cropsey in the canoe? Was he just taking a chance? How did he know that we're going to build a raft and come and find him? I cannot get behind plot holes that massive. I'm sorry. It's really difficult to get behind that idea when we don't know how long Cropsey was waiting in the canoe. Was he just taking a chance? Or was he just having a little nap with his shears, as you do? I don't know.
Yeah, what would he doing? What would he doing? And also, he weren't attached to anything.
No.
So he was just floating. Just floating down river, hoping that they were going to build a raft and find him. And then they did. And then he managed to kill them all from a canoe, them on a raft, and he didn't fall in.
Yeah.
I don't believe.
Quite remarkable. I mean, don't get me wrong. I love a good slasher kill, and in terms of effects, it's great. But it's just like, it really takes me out of the moment where all I can think about is, hang on a minute. It's just...
No, you're right. You are right. I think it just speaks to the inherent laziness of this film that, like, there's plot holes, there's continuity errors, there's, like, no real care in it. Even, I mean, when you watch a slasher that's got an obvious, like, there's passion and enthusiasm behind it, that shines through.
Yeah.
And I think, like, when we talked about Friday the 13th, when you're watching one where it's like a cash grab, it's like we just want to make as much money as we can, it really comes across because there's just no care to, like, make that narrative make sense.
Yeah.
It's just like, oh, well, get them on a raft, get them all slashed up. And I mean, the scissors did freak me out, I've got to be honest. The big pair of scissors did make me feel...
I mean,
bum clenching.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, no, at least there was some... I mean, I'll tell you which one really creeped me out, actually, was when... so the bully guy and his, girlfriend by default, I suppose, who doesn't really have a choice in the question, that end up having sex, and he leaves to get matches from the camp. Again, I was kind of like, oh yes, why don't you leave a defenseless defenseless girl in the middle of the woods and then run back to camp, you absolute fuckhead.
Oh my god.
And she gets the way she gets murdered is the way the shot is constructed, it looks like he's just, I don't know, like he's gonna cut her teeth off, and it really did freak me out. Like that shot, I was kind of like, I don't like it. Sorry.
Yeah, I didn't like it, and I really hated that where she'd got in water with that guy who she was like, oh, I'm not really sure about him, and she were right because he were a knobhead.
Yeah.
And then Cropsey had stolen all her clothes and like hung them all from branches. That really made me uncomfortable. I just thought, why are we having to look at this poor naked lass walking through woods? It would just, and I really, Eddie were called, because I've got hope Eddie gets his dick chopped off. On me note.
Yeah, I've got Eddie the rapist on my notes, because I'll tell you what creeped me out about this actually was the I was going to say the realism of it, just because the intense vulnerability, as you said, you see this poor girl walking through the woods completely naked, picking up her clothes, felt very, like the most vulnerable position. And the next morning when they find him, asleep and completely care, like he doesn't give a shit. He doesn't give a shit about what happened to her. Yeah. And he really resonated with the experience of that so many women would have had. And it's just so fucking creepy, this whole thing. And you think, are we supposed to feel any sympathy for this character?
And I think that comes across all the way through, because all interactions are all about this guy's trying to have sex with you, whether you want to or not. And when he's either got what he wants or he ain't got what he wants, so he's annoyed because you've not given what he wants, you're just a disposable object to him. Yeah. And he just don't care. So when they were like, where is she? Oh, I don't fucking know. It's not my problem. Yes. Like, no concern that she's gone missing in woods.
Exactly. No. That's it, exactly. They have no concern that she's gone missing or why, what could have happened to her. They're pissed off about the fact that apparently she could have stolen 5 canoes by herself, by the way.
By herself. And also, why? Why would she do that? Why would she steal 5 canoes and leave you stranded? It makes no sense. Like, she's not mad at any of you. She's not even... The thing that got me, and I think the reason why it was so upsetting, is because she weren't even mad at him. She was mad at herself, as though she'd brought it on herself. Yeah. And then when she's like walking through and she's like, oh, please give me... It was so, like you said, so realistic. Yeah, exactly. But in a way that were designed to not to be realistic to a point that you're supposed to empathise with her, but it's a way that it's designed to be realistic. It's like that male gaze, isn't it? It's like it's designed to be realistic, so you feel fear, and that's somehow... I suppose it feeds into what you were saying earlier about that idea that people watch slashers because they like seeing naked women get murdered.
Exactly. It's supposed to feel titillating, and it's so deeply wrong, right? It's so deeply wrong. In a moment where a woman is at her most vulnerable is, used for... for selling sex purposes. Is fucking, like, it's just so disturbing, I find. So
to like build that like you said, that titillation, build that sort of pressure that then it's like released when she's murdered. It's like it's exciting, and to me it weren't exciting. To me, I just thought, this poor woman, like, what a horrible thing to how humiliating.
Yes, exactly.
First, you've been treated like shit by this guy, then you can't find your clothes, you don't know who's took them. Obviously she assumes it's people from this camp, so like she's worried that they're all watching her naked, like trying to find her clothes, and then she gets murdered. Like, it's just really awful.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just really unpleasant.
It is. I feel like the whole the whole premise of the film is really about treating people like shit as well, right? Because when when there is that campfire scene where the leader of the camp, Todd, tells them the story of Cropsey, and that's when you... I think I don't know if it's at that point or later in the film that you realize that he was one of the boys that was involved in the original accident, and you think that this guy has turned like is basically like he's there pretty much confessing to the deadly assault, but then turned it in.
See, I didn't even get that.
Turned it into an urban
him
legend.
Anyway.
No, like, but I mean, what a horrible thing! What a fucking horrible thing! You just, I think it's at the end of the film when just before the killing, basically, that that you see the flashback and that you realize that he was one of the boys involved in the original thing, but that he's turned the accident into a commodity, into something that he can use to his advantage to scare other campers. And it's just, first of all, it's a major plot hole, obviously. You think after something like this had happened, I don't think he would have been allowed to work with children, but
that somebody might have been arrested, that maybe that or
some sort of
or that he
investigation.
might have some sort of shame about setting a man on fire.
Also, the fact that he says, they never found his body, and you're like, they did. I mean, he was in hospital for 5 years.
They did. He was in hospital. They definitely did.
Yeah.
It just that makes him even worse. God, I didn't even realise that.
No. Exactly. So like everybody is, every man in this film is either a creep or a criminal, or frankly has no redeemable characteristic, and yet we get two final boys in this film. There are no final girls. It's
two
just,
final boys. Well, I did think that. Like, I could tell that they were pegging fucking creepy Alfred to be final girl.
Why doesn't he get murdered?
Why? You pick the worst one. The two worst people to be survivors. Mm-hmm. And I mean, Glazer were a dickhead, and then he were a two-pump chump. And we all know that he were a dickhead. But I just feel like did Jason Alexander die?
No, he survives.
He survives because he were all right. I mean, what were he doing? He were buying porno mags and stuff. He weren't doing all that
and
terrible.
cracking jokes. So it's okay, I suppose.
He were pretty harmless in it. He weren't that bad. But yeah, I just thought like, even that sex scene, like you were talking about, how it sets up when he comes back and finds her and she's dead. But like, there's a bit in that where she very audibly says, "Stop." You hear her go, "Stop," and he don't stop.
Oh no!
And then he's like, "Oh,
it creeps me out."
Stay here. I'll get some matches.
Oh, the line that creeps me out, he says, "Don't worry, baby. It's going to be real good. It's gonna." And I was like, "Oh, yeah." Like when you again, and knowing who created this film, you're kind of like, "Oh, fuck! This is just so disgusting." I mean, there's no way to watch this film now without reflecting on on this. It's just
no. And I think it is a very damning time capsule. Mm-hmm. I think it's a very damning film to watch now. And I did see when I were looking up some just looking the film up, that when all his crimes came to light, that somebody who were an assistant on that film said that he'd done that to her on that film. So even then, even when they were filming The Burning in 1981, he were on his creepy fucking sexual assaulty shit, and so you think about what must that set have been like for them women?
Oh my god, absolutely.
It must have been.
Yeah, I read that so the girl who walks through the woods completely naked actually said that she was deeply, deeply uncomfortable about filming that scene, and that it went on for so long that they kind of put her through the mill, really, basically, shooting that scene over and over again. And it was, so they used a filter in that scene to make it look like it's during the night, but it was, in broad daylight. So the whole thing is just really, unpleasant, I think. So it's, for me, it's not a film that, I can watch and be kind of like, oh, but it's a fun, light summer camp slasher. It's just, it seems so much more problematic than that.
Yeah, because I don't think you can even if you took the fact that Harvey Weinstein were involved in it away from it, and you tried to watch it purely from without thinking about that, even the film itself is so, there's not one positive representation of women in that film. There's not one positive representation of a sort of sexuality, and it's white, it's hetero, it's all them things that we know is problematic about slashers. But there's not one sexual encounter in that film that's not coerced, creepy, aggressive, violent. And I think even from that perspective, even if you took, what we know now about Harvey Weinstein out of it, just watching it from that perspective, it's uncomfortable because it's all that same shit of like, oh, women say no, but they mean yeah. That's what it is all the way through. And
exactly.
if they don't say if they don't say yeah, it don't matter because you'll just wear them down anyway. It's so creepy.
Yeah, through and through.
But when we did finally see Cropsy, when he popped up at that window, I did scream. So he did get a jump scare in.
Yeah, good jump scare and again very good very good work from Tom Savini, I would say, all the way through in terms of the special effects. Very good. So now that we've completely destroyed this film, do you have some really good folklore or urban legends for us to discuss?
Well, I do, but also slightly bleak at the start anyway this week, which is, I just want to give it, because I'm going to talk about Cropsy, I just want to give a bit of a content warning for listeners that I am going to discuss. I'm gonna gloss over it because, as we've said before, this is not a true crime podcast and we don't want to be sort of exploitative about people suffering, but I feel it's necessary. So just a bit of a content warning. I am going to be talking a little bit about sort of uncomfortable topics relating to children very briefly, and then we'll move on. But as you mentioned, Clelia, so Cropsy was the boogeyman of Staten Island in the 70s and 80s, and stories centre on, it's the usual urban legend, an escaped mental patient who lives in this abandoned institution, and he was coming out at night to steal kids from streets, and he's often presented as having either a hook for a hand, like what we talked about last time, hook hand man, or wielding a bloody axe. And so children were warned that he'd attack them and he'd drag them into tunnel system. So on Staten Island, we've got two key points for this Cropsy legend, which is the Willowbrook State School, that I'll talk about in a minute, but the Seaview Hospital, which is an abandoned tuberculosis sanatorium, my apologies. So, I mean, that already sounds like a horror film.
It really
Staten
does,
Island sounds like a pretty spooky place. But the stories were that Cropsy would get you and he would drag you into this tunnel system that is under the ruins of this Seaview Hospital. So what I'd written quite generously is that so there's two versions. So there's the story that people heard, the urban legend, and then there's the summer camp variation that people who went to summer camps, so I guess around like New York State would have heard, which is the story of a once respectable man named George Cropsy who goes insane after a prank goes wrong and leaves him disfigured, and he starts to kill campers with an axe. So what I'd written is that the film faithfully represents this story, but actually what I mean is they couldn't be bothered to change it, so they basically took the story and just padded it out a bit to make a script. And so although the story of Cropsy is terrifying, the sort of urban legend, the boogeyman, people just thought that it was this, usual thing, a scary story to keep kids from staying out too late or going too far from home, or to give people shivers around a campfire when they were at summer camp. But unlike a lot of urban legends that we grew up with, this one may actually be true. So, this is where it gets a bit bleak. So people might want to skip forward a few seconds. So Andre Rand worked as a janitor at the Willowbrook State School that I've mentioned. So the Willowbrook State School was an absolute horrible place, and it was supposed to be a school for children with intellectual disabilities, and that's not my terminology, that's in air quotes, that's just what but it were reported to be just this nightmare of sexual abuse, corporal punishment, and overcrowding, and children that were there were also intentionally infected with hepatitis as part of a research program. So a really miserable, horrible place.
Grim.
So grim. And he worked there as a janitor during this time. So a media expose raised awareness about the atrocities that were taking place there in 1972, but it didn't close until 1987. But it did close. So it became much like Seaview, the abandoned spooky sanatorium. We had the abandoned Willowbrook State School. So you've got these two big abandoned, terrifying looking buildings, which you can Google them, and they are everything out of like a gothic novel, like what you would imagine you would see. And so when it closed in that same year, so Andre Rand was arrested for the murder of a girl who'd gone missing, Jennifer Schweiger, and he'd been living in this sort of makeshift campsite on the grounds a Willowbrook that had been abandoned, which is not far from the ruins of Seaview Hospital that were so closely tied to this Cropsey legend. So then the narrative became that actually Cropsey, the boogeyman, was real. That the boogeyman was Andre Rand, who had been living in this makeshift camp and he'd been taking children, and there were some disappearances in the 70s and 80s. And he was eventually sentenced to 25 years for Jennifer's murder, and then a further 25 years in 2004 after evidence came to light that suggested he was involved in other disappearances in the area. So there is a documentary about this, and it is one of my recommendations for this week, but it's called Cropsey.
Yes,
it was on Netflix. I'm assuming it still is. And it is a really good documentary. I have seen it before we were talking about this for this, but it explores it in much more detail. And I think they even go into like the abandoned hospital, which was quite terrifying. But yeah, so Cropsey as the legend, as the foundation for this film, was quite a specific one because it was specific to Staten Island, and I don't think it necessarily ever translated into, like a lot of stories, like we talked about the Hook Hand Man. We've heard these stories; they're not purely American. They sort of met the way around the globe, but I don't think Cropsey necessarily did. But obviously, they picked up Cropsey for this film, which sort of brought. I suppose you can if it happened in 81, it would before people knew that Cropsey were real, I guess, when they were sort of making the film. But yeah, so that's the grim but true story about Cropsey. Although I think there is some doubt about whether Andre Rand did commit the crimes that he's being arrested for, which I will come back to in a moment. But I do have an urban legend involving scissors, if you would like to hear about that one.
Yes.
So this is from Japan, and I had heard about this before, actually, and so I was glad that I got to do a bit more research on it to talk about it, which is the sort of legend of Kochisake Onna, who is also known as the slit-mouthed woman. And she is an onryo, which I think I've pronounced that right, a vengeful spirit, a Japanese legend. But she has also been referred to as a contemporary yokai, which I think is very interesting. I'm going to look a bit more into this, because obviously we know the yokai, there's a long history of those. It really embedded in Japanese history and folklore. But there's this idea that they're still adding yokai to the list, and she is one of them. So again, shows that way that like folklore evolves, and how we continue to change the stories that we tell. So I think that's really interesting. But according to legend, she approaches people, and she's got a mask or a fan or something covering her face, and asks them if she's pretty. And if they say no, she either cuts the face with scissors, or shears, a machete or a knife, depending on the version. Goodness me.
Depending how she feels on that day.
Yeah, like, you would not notice this woman with, like a machete in her hand. I mean, scissors, you think, all right, maybe you could get away with that. You could sort of conceal them in your pocket, but a machete.
I mean, if they're holding it when they're asking you if they're pretty, I think you'd be kind of like, you'd be willing to tell them whatever they want to hear.
Yeah, absolutely. You'd be saying whatever. Yeah, yes, you are. Wonderful, beautiful. Or in some versions, if they say no, she lets them leave, but then comes back that night to kill them.
Oh.
If they say yes, she takes off her mask or whatever's covering her face to show her scars, and then asks again, am I pretty? And if they say no, she just kills them on spot. If they say yes, she slashes the mouth anyway. So basically, you can't win. Whatever you say. If you meet this woman, whatever you say, you're getting slashed.
Okay, yeah. Right. No way out.
So to survive an encounter, you're supposed to confuse her. So you're supposed to either say that she's average or so looking. You're not supposed to say yes or no. Or you can distract her with money or sweets, particularly like hard-boiled sweets. She likes those in particular. So you would throw those and she'd get distracted picking them up so you could run away. So that's the story of the slit-mouthed woman. But when you look at the history of who she's supposed to be, I think we get into a very interesting something that I think we've sort of talked about already for this and in last series as well. But essentially, some of the stories would say that she originates in the Edo period from the 17th to the 19th century. So there's this really long history of her as this angry, vengeful spirit. But then others would argue that it's actually a contemporary legend, that it didn't start until the 1970s. So there's some debate around how long the slit-mouthed woman has been wandering around cutting people up. But in all versions, she's a beautiful woman. But in some versions, she were either engaged or a mistress to a samurai. And then she cheated on him. And so he slashed her face as punishment and basically said, "How beautiful do you think you are now?" That's one version. In others, either her face were mutilated during a medical procedure or by a woman who were jealous of her because of how beautiful she were. So the story experienced this, either a resurgence in the 70s or it started in the 70s, depending on what you believe, when the media reported both the legend and started reporting rumours surrounding it about children either being harmed or dying or disappearing. And it ended up leading to this sort of cultural panic, like a sort of moral panic, where children were being escorted to school and they were never, they were not left alone because there were the fear that this woman were going to come and either kill them or like cut the face. And you see that a lot actually in a lot of urban legends. It's like the thing about the razor blades in Halloween candy and things like that, that the media really pushes and promotes these stories. But the slit-mouthed woman is still present in popular culture. But I just thought it was interesting about how it were all centred around how beautiful she is and how she's being punished for that. In whichever version, she's sort of punished for being attractive. So I don't know. What do you think about that, Clelia?
Yeah, I the first thing I was going to say when you started mentioning the story, I was like, I was going to say, it sounds like it's a story written by men.
Yes.
We've been talking a lot about the fact that folklore really revolves around fantastical figures or represented by women, and in those stories, exactly, women being punished for their beauty by other women or by other men. It's just, it's fascinating, and the more we talk about it, the more it makes me think there's something about the origin of those ghost stories or urban legends or all this is very I don't know. It's really fascinating that all those creatures are women, but find their origins in very very gendered, very real, stereotypical stories as well. So it's just I don't know, I'm not making much sense, but I think I know what I mean.
No, I think that's totally right, and I think it's all about reinforcing like the status quo, isn't it? It's always like I was thinking about it as well in terms of the focus on the sort of villain of the story being someone who's either physically or somehow mentally different. Again, big air quotes for that. But this idea that someone's gone crazy, or that being if they're disabled, so they've got a hook for a hand, or they've got like Cropsy being burned and being is that they're being othered, and then it just reinforces that stereotype about this, the outcast loner. And I just think there's this often like this really dark underlying theme in a lot of urban legends, which is that those who fall outside of the status quo are dangerous and they should be feared, and that they are the threat,
Absolutely.
the non-normative person.
I think
and it is.
Sorry, I was going to say, I think it's definitely that. It also makes me think that it's often a case of someone being driven mad by grief. Because I think in one of the variation of the Cropsy stories, like he's driven mad by a death in his family or something like this. And I think this also speaks to this otherness that is created by the fact that there is no space in our society to grieve, right? So there is only madness as a result of it, and that's a very interesting thing to explore, I think, definitely.
Yeah, absolutely. And that idea, I suppose, like with the slit-mouthed woman, it's like a woman who is is spitefully harming children or harming people just because she's ugly now.
Yes.
Because she's got these scars. It's again that idea that the only value in women is if they're physically like the follow the norms and are attractive, and even it is that, like you said, there's no space for grief, there's no space to be different, there's no space.
Yes.
It's all about reinforcing this like very heteronormative patriarchal status quo, and if anyone because
most of those
and if anyone falls outside, go on.
No, because I was thinking, because most of those figures, exactly, you take mermaids, who lure people to their death by their incredible voice, and they look so beautiful, and then they turn into these monsters or those ghosts. In Japanese culture is the same. It's like you're luring someone by this it's almost like beauty means safety, whereas being looking different is immediately a danger, like exactly what you've been saying. And that's
and that idea that women aren't to be trusted, so even if they look beautiful, they're a threat. They're luring you, they're using that to
there can't be one way or another.
Yeah, absolutely. But have we got any? What about recommendations then? If you liked The Burning,
well, I very much went for. Well, interestingly enough, I also had the Cropsey documentary on my watch list. But actually, I did. So I went in a completely different direction because I was like, if you like The Burning, then frankly, don't talk to me about watching something similar. But I came actually a film that was recommended to me by our friend Nathan, who runs Leicester Horror Con, is Little Darlings. I don't know if you've seen it. It's a 1980.
I don't think I've seen
and it's
that.
Honestly, like, if you want something, do a 180 after watching The Burnings, then this is a 1980 teen comedy coming of age about two teenage girls at summer camp who make a bet as to who will lose their virginity first. And while that might well sound completely icky, let me reassure you that the film actually holds a surprisingly female gaze and deals with the subject extraordinarily well for an 80s film. So I thought, for a film of the same period, it's really, really interesting to see what was done, like I said, around the same time. But obviously it's not a horror, but it's a fantastic wholesome film, actually. So yeah, would really, after watching The Burning, if you want to wash yourself of all that ickiness, then watch this one. What about you? What's on your list?
Oh, well, I was sort of thinking about the ending, and obviously it's set in a mine shaft for some reason. After the absolute agony of that prolonged chase, where you were like, why is anyone trying to save Alfred?
I know.
Just let him die, just leave him.
Die, exactly.
But then obviously and also when that guy could not jump out of the way of that coal cart while we were on a fixed track, I thought, you deserve what you get in here, you absolute idiot. If you can't get out of the way of that, then there's a problem. But it's sticking with the idea about bloodthirsty miners. I did go for My Bloody Valentine.
Fantastic.
Yes.
Fabulous.
And Cropsey, as I've mentioned. I also had Piranha, which is set. It's a creature feature. Shockingly enough, about piranhas, that has a sort of link to a summer camp. And then finally I had American Horror Story Asylum, which is a TV series, but I think when I was reading up about Willowbrook School and that expose, it made me think about the way that's got an undercover journalist, and that it's this very shadowy, dangerous asylum where people are supposed to be cared for, but they're not being cared for. So I think that is a worthy exploration of that topic. But definitely I would say to people, watch Cropsey the documentary, because it's really good.
It is really well made, I agree. But I was going to say about AHS Asylum. I think that's a really great one to bring up as well, in terms of people doing something that's very much inspired by those by urban legends and by true crimes and things that have really happened, but to have a team that that have researched the subject really well before making the TV series. So yeah, a great example.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess we'll see everybody next time and see what we think about the next film on our list.
We promise we love some of them.
We haven't picked them because we don't like them on purpose. It's just that we've never seen them.
Exactly.
So thanks for listening to Monstrous Flesh Summer Camp. Please join us next time as we continue our Summer of Screams. You can find out more about us via our website, monstrousflesh.co.uk, where you can find out more about our research for each episode, buy our wonderful merch, and see our upcoming events. We'd love to hear from you, either via our email or social media channels. Also, please rate and review wherever you listen to podcasts and help us spread our spooky word by telling your friends about Monstrous Flesh. Until next time, creep it weird, everyone!